This is Radio Health Journal. I'm Nancy Benson. This week, flat head syndrome.
We saw many, many more cases after pediatricians instructed parents to put their kids on the back of their heads.
What to do about the flat spot on your baby's head when Radio Health Journal returns.
I'm Reed Pence, the producer and host of Radio Health Journal. If you like listening to Radio Health Journal, you'll also like our sister show, Viewpoints, which covers a wide array of topics from education to history to the environment. Here's a preview of what they're covering this week on Viewpoints.
There were police officers coming 80 miles an hour down the street from every possible angle you can imagine. We were trying to get kids out of the street because kids were almost zombie-like, like walking back towards the school.
Revisiting the deadliest school shooting in U.S. history. Then,
a third of all marriages today in the United States were generated by matches made online. I think that's a perfectly good thing, but it's a different thing.
The sweeping societal changes in a tech-driven landscape. I'm Marty Peterson.
And I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth this week on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.
Listen to Radio Health Journal and Viewpoints on your favorite radio station. And subscribe and listen anytime on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Also, follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Radio Health Journal.
More than 200,000 newborn babies every year develop a flat spot on their head. And while it may be alarming to many parents, it doesn't need to be. They occur simply because an infant's skull is very soft. So if constant pressure is applied to the same area, it can cause the skull to change shape. That can lead to a condition known as flat head syndrome.
I wouldn't actually even call it a syndrome. It's a deformity of the skull. And in the 1990s, the American Academy of Pediatrics came out with a statement saying that children, babies, should probably sleep on the backs of their heads. And the reason for this is that there was a higher incidence of sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS, when kids were either sleeping on their sides or their stomachs. So they felt that kids would be much safer if they slept on the backs. And we've been continuing to do that since the 90s. And the side effect of that is that kids have come in with flattening either in the central portion of their skull or in the right or left side of the back of the skull.
That's Dr. Peter Taub, professor of pediatrics and neurosurgery at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai in New York City.
It can be noticed very early on, such as after the child is born, because there are cases sometimes when the child is either smushed into a strange position in the pelvis and is delivered with some kind of cranial shape abnormality, or it occurs within the first several months of life when the child is sleeping in a crib or on his back in a bassinet, and that softer skull tends to deform somewhat.
Many parents panic when they discover a flat spot on their child's head. Taub says the number one question moms and dads ask is, will my child's brain growth or cognitive function be impacted by a flat spot?
I tell them that no, this should not affect brain development because generally if you're pushing in one portion, there's usually some compensation in the other portion. Most of the consequences are aesthetic, the way the child looks. And a lot of times, a lot of clinicians will sort of just continue observing it, and if it gets better, great, and if there is still some asymmetry, it's probably not going to be too noticeable. Sometimes, babies have very little hair, and you see it very commonly and very easily when the baby's in the shower and the hair is sort of matted against the skull, and you can see a deformity very easily. As children start to grow and their faces develop, the face becomes a major portion of their overall look, and they grow hair, so you see it less as children get older.
But while flat spots are typically just a cosmetic issue that often goes away, many parents want to fix the deformity. One way of doing that is by having the child wear a custom-made helmet.
What a helmet is basically much like a bike helmet. It's a firm shell on the outside with some softer, but still somewhat firm, padding on the inside. And the helmet, the child comes into an orthotist. The orthotist takes some kind of mold or impression, either laser capture or with plaster, a mold of the skull, and a helmet is created from that. That helmet then can be recessed, or some of the foam can be taken away in areas where you want the child to grow, and a little bit more foam can be put on where you want a little bit more compression of the areas that are more prominent. So when the child's in the helmet, they're wearing it for about 23 hours a day. Here at Mount Sinai, many of our kids are in the helmet for about 4 to 6 months, and they're allowed to take the helmet off anytime they want. We usually recommend taking it off either for pictures or for bathing, and then getting right back into the helmet.
But before parents say yes to the helmet, it's important for them to consider factors such as cost, upkeep, and potential side effects.
They run about $3,000. In that ballpark. I think many of the insurances cover it. There's a little bit of work that goes into it on the part of the parents. I tell them, unlike a bike helmet, you don't sort of purchase one and leave it alone. This requires like going to the orthodontist. You have to fit it, follow up with the orthotist. Foam may have to be added, foam may have to be taken away. And this process goes on while the child is wearing that helmet. In the warmer or summer months, kids can get a little bit of a rash. Certainly, most of the time, the helmet gets very smelly and has to be sort of cleaned a little bit. Most of the time, though, kids do perfectly fine with it. Certainly, I think if you are able to sort of keep a child's head off it all the time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, there's some evidence that, that should work, but we can't do that all the time. So a helmet is worn at night, and it prevents that child from sleeping in any one position where you might not allow that head to improve in its shape.
Taub says he prescribes helmets to about 25 to 30% of cases he sees.
When I see parents, I sort of get a sense of the child and how severe the deformity is. And not using hard and fast numbers, I, in my own mind, have a sense of whether this is a sort of a moderate or severe deformity or whether it's a mild deformity. And then the flip side of this is also discussing the case with the parents. Some parents are very traumatized by this, and this is a big problem for them. Other parents are very casual about it and don't feel it's a problem at all. So I sort of have to balance the two. So if the child has a sort of a smaller deformity, but the parents are distraught over this, I might lean towards putting that child in a helmet. Conversely, if the child has a sort of little bit more severe deformity, but the parents just aren't bothered by it, they really don't care for the helmet therapy, then we let it go and we see how the child does.
So a helmet may be good for some infants and bad for others, but we can all agree that no one wants to wear a helmet for 23 hours a day. So are there ways to prevent a flat spot in the first place?
The shape of the child's head when they're born is determined by how the child is leaning in the uterus or how they're positioned in the uterus. Once they're delivered, then all of those forces go away. So once the child is born as a newborn, the parent can take very good interest in sort of making sure that the child is not positioned in any one spot or any one direction at any one time. So they can change that child's position, hold the child, make sure that the child sort of rotates from side to side so that they're not leaning in any one position all the time.
So parents play a big role in helping to preserve the shape of their baby's head. But if a flat spot deformity becomes too severe, or parents are troubled by the appearance of their baby's head, Taub says helmet therapy is an effective treatment option. Our writer this week is Hannah Swarm, studio production by Jason Dickey. I'm Nancy Benson.
Radio Health Journal returns in just a moment.
Supporting immune function through a healthy diet has become an important new focus for many people these days. One key recommendation is to eat more vegetables and fruits, such as grapes, every day to improve immune function. Combining grapes with vegetables can help achieve this goal in a tasty way, according to registered dietitian Courtney Romano, health advisor for the California Table Grape Commission.
Fresh grapes are heart-healthy and hydrating and linked to benefits in multiple areas of health, including supporting immune function. Grapes are always a smart snack choice on their own, and they also pair well with other healthy foods such as vegetables to enhance flavor and nutrition. Add grapes to a kale, spinach, or arugula salad. Roast grapes with cauliflower or broccoli. Combine grapes with cucumbers and feta for delicious and healthful eating.
Grapes from California are a natural source of antioxidants and other polyphenols. Visit grapesfromcalifornia.com for more information and over 300 recipes.
Chemotherapy is the backbone of cancer treatment. However, there are inherent risks associated with compounding and administering intravenous solutions. This concerns some pharmacists, such as Dr. Jeffrey Lombardo of the University at Buffalo, also a spokesperson for Sun Pharma, who welcomes options such as Infugem, gemcitabine in sodium chloride injection, the first and only pre-mixed formulation of this commonly used chemotherapy agent.
Taking proper precautions with compounding is essential to protect the healthcare workers who handle these materials and to ensure that patients receive high-quality chemotherapy at the right dose. Premixed options using engineering controls eliminate accidental exposure to toxic substances that may happen through mixing.
More information is available at Infugem.com. Infugem is contraindicated in patients with a known hypersensitivity to gemcitabine. Infugem can cause increased toxicity with infusion time greater than 60 minutes or dosing more frequently than once weekly. Monitor and, if necessary, discontinue Infugem for myelosuppression, pulmonary toxicity, and respiratory failure. Monitor renal function for hemolytic uremic syndrome and hepatic toxicity. Infugem can cause fetal harm. Advise females and males of reproductive potential to use effective contraception. Advise women using Infugem not to breastfeed. Infugem may cause severe and life-threatening toxicity when administered during or within 7 days of radiation therapy. Discontinue Infugem in case of capillary leak syndrome or posterior reversible encephalopathy syndrome. The most common adverse reactions for the single agent are nausea, vomiting, anemia, increased aspartate aminotransferase, increased alanine aminotransferase, neutropenia, increased alkaline phosphatase, proteinuria, fever, hematuria, rash, thrombocytopenia, dyspnea, and edema. Please see full prescribing information at infugem.com/infusion-PI.
And that's Radio Health Journal for this week. Radio Health Journal is a production of MediaTrax Communications. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more. And check Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify for a library of past programs. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and information about our guests at radiohealthjournal.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Radio Health Journal.
Coming up next week on Radio Health Journal.
There was a gap in between there from where I was to where I wanted to go. And so that's how it began to come up as something that I needed to save my own life by trying to help.
An innovative program to help mothers coming out of prison.
Then the horrific origins of chemotherapy.
Part of the reason the story is so little known was that, of course, no one wanted to tell patients that they were receiving a chemical weapon.
All that and more on Radio Health Journal.